Hi, my name is Andrew Sears, and I'm going to talk about principles for building a modular global Christian educational ecosystem. That's a little bit of a mouthful. I'm actually preparing this talk for a group of global Christian leaders that are thinking about the future of higher education, Christian higher education globally. And I want to be able to share this both with that group of leaders, but also more widely. So I wanted to essentially put this online. Just a little of my background. So I went to grad school at MIT, studied under one of the fathers of the internet. I spent the past 20 years working with and living among the poor, providing alternative educational systems. In 2008, became a college president of City Vision University, and have focused really the school on the concept of disruptive innovation. That's what I did my doctoral dissertation on, and most recently I've published a MOOC on disruptive innovation in higher education that has about 1,500 students in it, and published some articles on the Clayton Christensen Institute focused on alternative forms of global education. And a lot of the principles from those things I'm really applying to the Christian context here. I've also worked with a group of about 50 leaders from various Christian universities, about 20 different Christian universities and alternative education providers, called the Christian Higher Education Innovation Alliance, where we've looked at what is the future of Christian higher education. And I'm going to try to condense a lot of that into these slides. So I'm going to start off with the need for this new platform, as I'm describing it, this new ecosystem. The first area of the need, everyone knows that higher education is exploding. You had 100 million students in 2000, 263 million students in 2025. So in other words, in a 25-year period, you're growing more than higher education grew in the previous 900-year period. Most of that growth is happening in the developing world. There's a key question of how are we going to meet the need. So that's need number one. Number two is there's a lot of discussion around the rise of the majority world Christianity. Up to the past century, Christianity was largely a Western world phenomenon. Now, people give it various terms: the rise of the global South, the next Christendom. But the point is that the vast majority of Christian growth is now happening in the South. So this red line shows Christian membership by region. So by 2025, the vast majority is going to be, more than 2/3 is going to be in non-Western countries in the global South. But what's even more important than that is the growth of Christianity. 99% of the growth of Christianity is going to be in the global South. And one of the questions I like to ask people is, what company in the world would see 99% of their growth happening in the global South and not invest most of its resources there? And that's what the church and Christian universities need to be thinking about. The third trend to think about is this idea of consolidation. So there's been a lot of studies that have been done on what's happening, but one way to show this is if you look at the growth of Christian higher education since 2005, and you take all the top schools, and then you take the top two. The top two, Liberty University and Grand Canyon, have grown more than all the rest combined. And there's study after study that have shown that online education, I believe, is going to support maybe 1/10 the institutions that are currently around. So there's this massive consolidation. So there's a question of, will educational consolidation follow the same trend of media consolidation? So if you looked in 1983, to get to 90% of the market, it took 50 companies for overall media. But now in 2012, it only takes 6 companies to get 90% of the market. So I believe we're on a path to see the same type of consolidation, and I talk about some of the reasons for that in my MOOC. But I think that this is the future of the world, of what the world might look like, is you're going to have these technology platforms, and they're going to morph with educational networks. We just saw it with Microsoft buying LinkedIn, which bought lynda.com. but you can imagine other alliances where edX and Apple and Amazon, all of a sudden, what they did with music, the whole music industry now is a feature whenever you buy an Apple product, and education is a feature whenever you buy an Apple product. And iTunes U right now isn't that threatening to universities, but if it keeps disrupting the same way digital cameras have, then it might be. So I think in 2030, you might see these be the biggest educational platforms out there. Then the other thing is the phenomenon called mega universities. There's 21 mega universities with 1 million plus students. There's several in the US that have the ambition for that. There's Arizona State and College for America. And there's Chinese mega universities, Indian mega universities, and I think that the world's going to increasingly be dominated by these groups. And the key question is, will Christians have a strategy essentially to compete to have a global Christian education platform? And that's ultimately what the kind of overall point of this talk is that I believe that we need to be thinking about how do we have an overall ecosystem? How do we have an overall platform? It's not Christian institutions against each other. It's all Christian institutions working to strengthen the overall platform in the same way that the open source movement took on Microsoft. I think that Christians need to be thinking about that. I believe that there's 3 possible futures. One would be a technology dominant platform. So that would be those tech platforms. All of a sudden, there's been some people that said, and by 2030, 2040, there might be, 4 or 5 platforms that over half education happens. And I think they had tech platforms in mind. Another one would be state-owned mega universities that, some of these groups like University of Arizona, Arizona State, keep growing and they achieve their goal. And also with some of the things in the U.S. of nationalizing education that Hillary Clinton has proposed, you could have a future that it's these state mega universities that dominate, and what you would see is a 40% decline in Christian higher education. But I believe there's another future that's possible, and that's where you leverage the strengths of Christian higher education, and you start to see a global Christian educational platform where you see 500% growth in Christian higher education. So ultimately, that's the challenge, is in the face of these trends, global higher education growth, the growth of Christianity in the majority world, consolidation, how can Christian higher education achieve the preferred future of dramatic global growth? And that's really what this whole talk is about. So that was a long introduction. Now let me go into the idea of disruptive innovation. So the need for disruptive innovation. So the idea of disruptive innovation is that you have smaller markets like mainframes, then you have PCs that disrupt mainframes, then you have mobile phones that disrupt PCs, and each time what you do is you expand access to 10 times more users and you decrease the cost by a factor of 10. So traditional higher education, essentially what you have is you have a few million students at about a global average of $10,000 per student, give or take. And then you have this radically affordable blended education, and I would say the global average for that, you might have 10 million students at $1,000 a student, and this is per year. But I would say there's something that's even a bigger group, and that would be radically affordable mobile education. You might have 100 million students at $100 per student per year. Now, I know some people are looking at this who are traditional, folks in education, and they're horrified of the idea of mobile education because they realize you can't do the same transformation. That's absolutely true. And we fight these wars over, what's best. But if you look at Jesus' strategy, he had the 12, he had the 120, he had the crowds. And I believe that in higher education, we need to have all these levels, and they each serve their purpose. But I think it's these new levels that is a new opportunity, that we have a new opportunity for growth. And ultimately, just to show a picture of that vision, I believe that the biggest platform for distribution of Christian courses is likely going to be the Bible app. There's a lot of reasons for that, but ultimately what defines a platform is the most people who use it, and the Bible app is the most used Christian digital platform in the world. And I think that in the same way that WeChat became a platform and Facebook became a platform, ultimately I think the Bible app is going to be our biggest distribution mechanism. And then what you can do is you can combine that. So, you get 1 billion people using the Bible app. And then you combine that with quality mobile courses. Third Millennium has some amazing courses. They've invested, a good amount of money in developing. And then there's something I'm going to describe called this Global Christian College Credit Consortium with accreditation, where I'm trying to work out a partnership with Third Millennium where we could offer a $100 a year degree through mobile. So the other concepts, so what I'm going to go through the rest of the talk, I'm going to go through key concepts that are important and thinking through disruptive innovation and thinking through how do we have a strategy. And ultimately, this diagram here is the one that's most showed to describe disruptive innovation. So you have low quality applications, that these are the lines in the most demanding use. So you can think of digital cameras, where the first digital cameras were absolutely horrible, but they gradually got better, they got better until now the best digital cameras that are on cell phones are way better than any film camera, and they dominate the market. Now, one of the things, so I'm an architect. I studied under one of the top architects in the world at MIT who designed a lot of the internet architecture. And one of the trends that's true almost universally in architecture is that if you want to build it, if you want high quality quickly, you create an interdependent architecture. So you can think of the Apple Mac. It's not easy to take that apart. But if you want to get longer term quality, that's going to cost less, typically you use an unbundled architecture. So in many ways, I would say that this could also be, Android versus iPhone. Unbundled, Android's more unbundled, where iPhone's more interdependent. There's a question of, will Android ever, surpass the iPhone, and that's debatable. So each market, this is the theory, but it has to prove itself. But what I would argue is that there's a way, traditional courses have an interdependent architecture, and traditional universities have an interdependent architecture. It's not easy to unbundle components, but there's ways that you can have an unbundled architecture. And I want to talk about how we could potentially move up this quality curve. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit as I explain a little bit more what do I mean by modularity and unbundling. So my kids love toys, right? So, the idea is that degrees today is that they're a bundle. It's like a Tonka truck. You can't take apart a Tonka truck, or if you do, it doesn't really work. You can't put it back together very well. And a Tonka truck's built, Tonka tough, they say. So it's very strong, but, the idea of interoperable standards is that you can have unbundle education, and what that would be is the equivalent of Lego blocks. And I talk with a lot of people, and they look at today's education and they say that's horrible. What use is just a bunch of random knowledge? Where it has value is how it's put together, and that's absolutely true, because if you look at how much Lego sells their kits and their giant cities for, is order of magnitude more. So you can buy Lego blocks for a penny each, but to get a Lego kit, they charge me a ton, and I have kids who love these things, and I spend a lot of money on these kits. And I think, why not just use the blocks? But the reality is there's a lot more value to the kit. So these modular degrees and credentials are essentially like Lego kits, and then today's modern university could be transformed into something like a Lego city. So that's the basic idea, but what you need to do that is you need some standards and you need some modularity. So another way of looking at this is the idea that the degree itself right now is what you would call a vertically integrated market, where one provider bundles everything together. So, and you're getting really, whenever you get a degree, you're getting 4 things. You're getting knowledge acquisition, you're getting metacognition and skills. That's how it fits together and how you apply it. You're getting access to opportunity. That's going to be the credential, the network. And I think one of the most significant things in Christian higher education institutions is a transformative experience. But right now, in Christian higher education, you have to get all of those together. It's possible that you could make that modular and in some ways make it more effective. So what you can do is you can get the knowledge acquisition. It's already being unbundled. So you have students at Harvard. I had a friend recently who said, I'm taking courses at Harvard, but I'm actually learning the math from Khan Academy. So Harvard professors are competing with Khan Academy. They're competing with MOOCs. Students aren't showing up to their class because they're learning the material online. And there's a lot of other ways that you can unbundle knowledge acquisition. But the idea is that you have all that that's unbundled, and each group is competing with each other. And then you have the metacognition and skills, and you have the rise of internships are becoming more important. Then you also, one of the things that Western Governors has done is that they've separated out the mentoring aspect, and they have these course mentors that are separate from the faculty. And part of the reason why that's really important for Christians is because faculty are expensive, but mentors in churches, you can find tons of mentors in churches. And that is an immense asset that's not realized right now, that you could provide this. Then the other thing, access to opportunity. So there's ways that you can provide that in alternative ways. LinkedIn, people are saying, is ultimately going to compete with degrees, and having these portfolios and e-portfolios and things where companies can do analytics on people's experience rather than just looking at a resume. And then the last thing is a transformative experience. And you could have your transformative experience at the university, but I would argue that the best in the world at transforming people's lives is not Christian universities. It's actually church-based transformation. You can do that in ministries. You could have blended learning in developing countries. And the idea is if you can combine these together like a Lego kit, then I think that there's ways that you could actually be as effective or more effective than the vertically integrated university. And I've said to some people that I think that what a lot of Christian universities today need to worry about in terms of how do they compete with megachurches, because megachurches are going to be able to reassemble this bundle, and instead of sending their students off to college, they're going to just reassemble this bundle for themselves. So the next concept, so if the first concept was about unbundling, the second concept is the idea that technology presents an unprecedented opportunity to expand and document alternative education. So as I mentioned, I work with the poor, and in the past 10 or 20 years, some of the most significant things that have happened that have helped the poor have just been documenting what they actually have. So Hernando de Soto, he has this concept of dead capital, that the poor can't get loans because the majority of the poor's assets isn't documented. They have houses, but they have no deeds to the houses. So if you're able to just document their property, then all of a sudden you provide them with more resources than all the world's aid combined. And all you have to do is just document it. The same thing is happening right now in India, where you had 400 million people in India with no identification, and India is just documenting people. So what that's doing is that's eliminating, whenever the government gives money to people, it was being stolen. And so 400 million poor people now, or lower income people, are now able to get their benefits. And I would say that there's something out there called undocumented alternative education. Now, this isn't degree mill, this isn't degree printing. What it is, it's documenting stuff that really is there. Just like realizing property rights isn't just saying someone has $1 million, it's documenting what's there. And I would argue that there's trillions of dollars of lost value. So with that, I would put a question that's kind of a loaded question. Is education more secular or Christian globally? And most people who I talk to, they have this view of higher education. And, it is that we live in this world that's so dominated by secular that, if we're lucky in the next 50 years, we might, and I would argue that we have about 5% of the way they're defining higher education. If we're lucky, we might be able to keep that at 2 or 3%. And it's almost like this remnant theology of, by the time Jesus gets back, then there'll be one person left in education, Christian higher education, and everything else will be secular. And I think that that is a defeatist attitude, and part of it is playing the game on their terms. It really depends on how you frame the question. So is education more secular or Christian globally? Well, if you define it according to the term accredited higher education, then it's more secular. But if you say who's in weekly education, regular education programs globally, then the church has 91% of the market compared to higher education students. So part of the reason why that's important is that I believe that the majority of Christian education is alternative education. So right now, we're playing the game by their terms. We're saying the only thing that matters is really the tip of the iceberg. The Bible colleges, the Christian universities, seminaries, the liberal arts colleges. Now, what's happening is there are, tens of thousands of Bible institutes, ministry, experience programs, educational discipleship programs, correspondence, continuing ed, alternative education courses, professional experience. And all of this is non-traditional, but it is accreditable. And with technology, this is growing dramatically. This is growing tenfold. It's growing 100-fold. Our ability to measure this is growing tenfold or 100-fold. That is the biggest opportunity for disrupting. If there's any one point I want to make, it's that this section here for the church and for Christians is the biggest opportunity out there. Then there's a lot of stuff that's non-traditional, but it's not going to be accreditable. I would love to get a degree for my, listening to sermons or Bible studies or small group or Christian radio or going to conferences, but that's just not going to happen. So what we have to focus on is this non-traditional but accreditable education. Now, let me try to map this out for you. And I've talked with hundreds of groups. I did my dissertation on this. I read, tens of thousands of pages on this. And what I've tried to do is map out what are the key categories in here. What's the part that's kind of above water that we see? And, I'm going to map out the categories. You have Christian mega universities. You have online Christian universities. And I list some of the accreditors that are out there. You have Bible colleges. You have Christian universities. You have seminaries. And then you have these things that I'm calling church and ministry microcampuses. And I actually put them part above water, part below, because some are accredited and some aren't. But I think that they represent a very interesting phenomenon that I'll talk about a little bit more later. But then below, you have this domain called Christian Courseware and subscriptions. You have Christian free and open courses like Third Millennium. You have Bible institutes that I mentioned. There's tens of thousands. You have missions and ministry training, YWAM University of the Nations. You have Christian continuing education. You have homeschool college credit. You have ministry professional experience. You have unaccredited ordination training. All those are accreditable if you do the work to document them. But even more, I guess a larger group out there is the secular partners. Now, part of what's interesting is the unbundled world. You can start to use these other courses. Just like, a lot of Christian schools will use a secular textbook to teach math. There's no reason why you can't use some of these secular courseware. So we've partnered with Sailor Academy. They have the first 2 years of college for free. We partnered with Straighterline. We're looking at how do you use MOOCs and to provide credit. There's a lot of groups out there that are these things that I call micro campuses out there. You have paid courseware, you have open textbooks, and then you have vocational qualification providers that are out there. And this represents the ecosystem. So whenever I say ecosystem, this is what I'm talking about. How do we make this whole system as healthy as possible? Because ultimately, this is what's going to determine, can we compete in a global world? And this whole category, I would say, is tertiary education. And I would argue, if there's any one other point that I'm trying to get across, is that we can't repeat the mistakes of the past by expecting the majority world, those in the non-Western world, to wear the suits of Western accreditation. I pulled this image off of Wikipedia, and it was an example of missionaries dressing up native folks in suits and saying, look, we converted them to look like us, so therefore they're better. That's what we're trying to do with accreditation. And the point is that we can't make them wear the suits of Western accreditation, but there still needs to be appropriate standards and signals. And I think a lot of that is in the distinction between higher education versus tertiary education versus vocational education. So all this kind of leads up to the idea of what are the components of a Christian higher education ecosystem. And I would say that there's 5 tiers. At the base is really the content. It's the course and program developers. Third millennium, some of these are free, some of them are for fee or commercial. And I think we need both. And then you need distribution. And the distribution could be through apps, it could be through the web, LMS, through MOOCs, through the Bible app, YouTube, iTunes, print, church networks. But also in the distribution is also the delivery method, which is a little different. A lot of ministries will do offline only, or they'll do blended, or increasingly online only or mobile only is becoming significant. And then there is alternative credit mechanisms. One of the things I'm going to talk about is this thing called GC4, which I am proposing as a Christian global course level accreditor. But there's other things out there in the US. There's something called ACE credit, or there's AP test, standardized tests. There's national vocational frameworks that most countries in the world will have. You have prior learning portfolios. You have articulation agreements. I wrote a couple articles for the Christensen Institute, basically creating a survey of what are the types out there and what's really needed to achieve the modularity that's needed for disruption. Then the 4th layer is the church and ministry microcampuses. Now, not everyone's going to have a microcampus. Some people will go with online only. Some people may not go for alternative credit. They may be fine just getting the training. So the idea of this is you could take any number of these layers, but they kind of build on each other. But these church and ministry microcampuses like CHEIA Global, Virtues Campus, and there's a lot of groups. Southeastern is one of the leading Christian models, but there's secular models out there. Kepler, Minerva, Courseware Learning Lab, edXU Labs, Khan Lab School, and Bridge International Academies. And then you have accredited degree pathways. So, and really that's any accredited institution that really is focused on accepting alternative credit. Now, every school will say, oh, we'll accept some alternative credit, but that's not really their mission, and they actually make it pretty difficult. So the secular models out there, Thomas Edison or Excelsior, where that's the majority of their students. And in the school that I run, that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to make ourselves a Christian counterpart to some of these institutions that provide full degrees, but really to integrate with alternative credit. So I talked about this disruptive innovation graph, and what I want to talk about is how do we get to that level of quality of this ultimate Christian ecosystem? What does that look like? So you start off with the most basic level. I said that down here at the bottom you have you have the not very good quality. So this might be the digital cameras in the 1980s. So open videos and books. Open videos just by themselves, their quality is okay. I mean, what's the average quality of YouTube? Well, not that good. And a lot of open books, sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not. But then the next tier, I would say, are open courses. In the Christian world, there's been this seminary in a box concept, or a seminary on a flash drive. And that is definitely better, because what you're doing is you're creating a Lego kit, not just open videos. But it's a first tier kit. It's not a whole Lego set. It's an open course. Then a lot of the MOOCs, one of the things that they learned is that they have to have just not just courses, but validated courses. Can you verify that this person actually completed it and that they are who they said they are? Then the next tier up is micro degrees. MIT just launched their MicroMasters program. And in many cases, these are really packaged to make it easy to give alternative credit. And then the next tier up is giving courses for alternative credit. So, each tier as you move up, it becomes more valuable to the student, and they all can kind of build on each other. So, you can have open courses that then become validated, that you package into a Lego kit of a micro degree, and then you, add credit to. Then the next tier up is, I have worked in online education. I know there's a lot that you can do in online education, but there's a lot you can't do. And there's a big advantage, I think, for Christians in potentially partnering with churches to provide blended learning at micro campuses and provide essentially accredited vocational diplomas. And that's a big tier up, where it's, theirs would be the next, it'd be like a Lego, not quite a Lego city, but the next size up on Lego. And then you could have blended learning at micro campuses for university degrees. So we're doing this right now in Kenya, where we have a partner in Kenya that has provided blended learning for our degree program. And whenever they graduate, they're going to be graduating with an American degree. But the holy grail is this thing, and I'm combining a ton of words because there's not another name for it, but there probably will be a shorter name. But it's blended, personalized, so it adapts to what you need, personalized learning, using millions of modular adaptive courses. So think of an app store of millions of courses. Each one's modular. Each one's adaptive. So if you already know the content, then you're going to finish it really quickly. If you pick it up slow, it's going to take you a lot longer. And you're going to get a full university degree. So, the school that's probably trying to do this more than any other right now is Minerva. They're trying to provide an Ivy League education using these new methods. It'll be, remains to be seen on whether they can do that. But ultimately, they've attracted, I think, the former president of, I forget what it was, I think it might have been Yale, is running it. So I think in the long run, there's a path to this. So that's how you essentially disrupt. Now, one key component of that is this alternative accreditation. I want to talk about what we've called the Global Christian College Credit Consortium, and that is a work area of this group called the Christian Higher Education Innovation Alliance that I'll explain a little bit more later. And what we're trying to do is provide course level accreditation to ministry schools. So we're doing this under a UK awarding body called Qualify, which offers accreditation under the vocational framework structure of Ofqual in the UK. And the plan is to provide level 3, 4, and 5 certificates and diplomas that would be recognized in many Commonwealth countries. And they would be considered accredited for transfer credit evaluation. We may also look at developing other forms of alternative accreditation, like Multilateral Alliance of Christian Articulation Agreements. There's a group called CASE that's doing that. GC4 right now is a part of the Christian Nonprofit Tech Mission that I run, and the idea is that we have a very bare bones review process of the material, and it requires that, one of the main benefits is that instead of the faculty graders have to have a master's degree to teach the undergraduate, if they're teaching at level 3, so freshman level, they only have to have completed a level 3 in that area to be able to teach there. The key part of that is that the partner must have some sort of documentation trail. And right now, for the pilots that we're launching, we're doing that in an online and mobile system. So right now, GC4 status, we've already done a partnership with Sailor Academy. They offer 25 courses for $25 each, or free if you provide local proctoring. So that's how we got to the $5,000 degree, so a 4-year degree for $5,000. It's been reviewed by our US accreditor DEAC and Qualify. Right now, Qualify is reviewing 3 different partners that we've are working with them on. Visions International University, which is a 4-year Bible school. CHEIA Global, they have a church-based program providing the freshman year for free. And YWAM University of the Nations, their online school of the Bible. And we are in discussions with Third Millennium with the hope of providing a full year of credit for $100, and a lot of other groups out there. And covering a lot of different languages. And at some point, we'd like to talk with other groups, Bible Mesh, Logos, and thousands of Bible institutes. So after people graduate, complete their year, they're going to get a transcript, and it's going to have things that tie back to a global system that that can, work for accreditation. So the way this works, this is an example of rebundling, and this is how, we got our $5,000 degree. So the last year we're providing at $3,500. We have to go through a lot more hoops with DEAC, our accreditor, so we have to charge more for that. But the first 3 years, theoretically, right now, could cost $100 each. And we may very soon have the first year for $100. So you could have a degree program for less than $4,000, a 4-year degree program. Eventually, I want to keep driving this price down. And the idea is, I believe that the primary delivery method is largely going to be blended church-based education for at least the first few years. So our goal ultimately for City Vision is that we want to be able to drive down that last year, our marginal cost. We believe as we're able to scale, we can get that last year down to $1,000. So if we can get the first 3 years down to $300 each, you're talking about a $1,300 bachelor's degree. Now, will that be the highest quality degree? Well, if you want the highest quality, I think what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to pay for more of the blended education. And, you can get the basic model. You can get a lot more if you go for the blended education. And then there'll be, the premium model that you can get these things. So I think that there's going to be a way to do that. And I believe that as we get to these price points, we're going to grow, City Vision right now, we're in the hundreds, but I believe it will be in the thousands and hopefully tens of thousands in the next few years. So that was the second concept, is the importance of unaccredited education. The third concept is the importance of this idea of the long tail. Now, a lot of you probably have heard of the long tail. You may have heard of it, heard of the idea behind the 80-20 rule. Sometimes it's called the Pareto principle, and the idea is that 80% of the profits comes from 20% of products, and that's the blue line here, and that used to be true before the internet. But after the internet, you went to the red line, and now, and there's actually been a study by a professor at MIT who he said that right now it looks like about 60% of the profit comes from 40% of the products. And what this chart's showing is, over on the left you have the blockbuster hits that are very popular, but on the right you have very unpopular YouTube content. And this long tail is becoming increasingly important, and that's having huge implications on all sorts of things. So one of the things is that it increases the diversity of content. So back whenever there were video stores, something like Blockbuster Video, if you wanted to get documentaries, they only carried 75 documentaries. Amazon.com, back whenever the study was done, which was a few years ago, had 17,000 documentaries out of 40,000. I just looked, they have 85,000 now. Our websites, if you look at how much traffic is provided by various search terms, the top 500 search terms provide about 20% of our traffic, but the next 80% come from 600,000 search terms. Now, why that's important is that non-Western culture voices are largely on the long tail, especially Christian voices. Almost all the global Christian publishing is Western voices. So what the internet does is, as it extends the long tail, it's going to decrease the proportion controlled by big media, traditional universities, traditional publishers, which is going to give more room to non-Western voices. And having an open strategy is also going to maximize the visibility of non-Western voices. So now, one of the other implications of the long tail is that there's been the idea, the long tail's been empowered, and part of what that's done is it's also resulted in a lot of consolidation. So if this is a distribution curve of what newspapers used to be, and on the left would be the low quality newspapers that were barely getting by. On the right was the New York Times. And there was a ton of newspapers in the middle that were like a typical city or state newspaper that were okay. They weren't great, they weren't terrible. But what's happened is, after the internet, all the content's available to everyone. So what's happened is, this now is the distribution of companies. You're either best in the world or you don't exist, because what happened is there was a lot of commoditization of the long tail, and all these, average quality providers just got lost in the noise. And so either you're best in the world, or really if you want to make money, the people publishing on YouTube or publishing blogs generally aren't making money unless they're in the best in the world. The people making money really is, there's only two business models. There's best in the world, or you're a long tail aggregator. And the middle has basically disappeared. So part of where that would show up is in this diagram. So I just want to show graphically what it really looks like to have this two-tiered market with no middle and various categories, so you can kind of understand what it is that I'm talking about. So journalism, The Economist is one of the few journalism newspapers or magazines that is still doing reasonably well. But there's another strategy. Huffington Post grew dramatically by essentially finding the long tail of authors and working with them. Video, so Hulu has some of the best content that's out there, but YouTube has a bunch of junk of people just showing random videos, but both of those are viable business models. Pearson is premier educational publisher, but Amazon has CreateSpace, and there's tons of other self-publishing companies. And then in the space of talks, you have TED Talks that these are best in the world, and there's a Christian counterpart to that, which is called Q Ideas. And then you have the long tail, which is podcasts. So anyone can publish their own podcast. And then for sermons, you have this thing called the Church app, which is used by thousands of churches, where you just put out random sermons, and you don't have to be the best in the world. And I think that I use that example and show the Christian examples because I think that that's going to have implications for courses. Because if you had a look at what are people listening to, I'm guessing the Church app probably gets 1,000 times more listens, and iTunes U probably gets 1,000 times more listens than Q Talks, even though they're really good, because they're going after the long tail. And then courses, you have Courseware and edX that really are about the premium courses. But whenever I published my course, I published on Udemy and iTunes U because while I think it's good, I didn't want to go through the effort to make it the best in the world. And I don't have a brand that's going to, make it the best in the world. So, and then credentialing, you have the world's best, which is this traditional degree. And then you're going to have the long tail, which is, going to be one of these modular systems that I talked about, maybe an adaptive competency-based education ecosystem. So people will still buy traditional degrees. It's just the market may be smaller, and there may be more competition coming from this long tail approach. So that's the long tail idea. Now, the next idea is the idea of the lean startup. So the idea behind the lean startup is that the whole world or most of things in the world are complex systems. And complex systems can really only be understood by performing experiments on them. And the best way to do that is you have a rapid learning cycle. And the whole, I think, idea behind the lean startup is the quality of a company really is based on how quickly it can learn, how quickly it can iterate on its learning cycle. So you build something and you have this idea of a minimum viable product. Sometimes companies will just put out a website and say, sign up if you want to, they'll get a website and they'll get a diagram of what they want to sell. And it might be a new cell phone. They've not even built the cell phone. They just want to see if people would buy it. And then if enough people buy it, then they'll actually build it. So you put a minimum viable product, you get data, you learn, you find out, what, that cell phone that I did was not a good idea, but I might switch to do, something else. And the idea is that this is how the world is working because systems are so complicated, things are changing so quickly. Ultimately, if we're going to approach this, and what I've been trying to do, this talk's called Principles for Building a Christian Educational Ecosystem. Ultimately, what we need to do is we need to be designing lean startup experiments so we can test some hypotheses on what this ecosystem, would be. Now, I've created my own list of hypotheses, and my best guess at what is going to be the, what I would guess the way it's going to turn out. But honestly, I am certain that my guesses are wrong. I just don't know which ones are wrong. So here's some key hypotheses to test if we were going to go for this. So, what's going to be the best strategy for Christian courses? Long tail or the world's best? I would argue that we should do both, because one, we don't really know, and two, I think that there will be both. I think the long tail is going to dominate, because I think that that's what's happened in Christian content so far for sermons and things along those lines, but I could be wrong on that. So then the next thing, what's going to be the dominant distribution platform for Christian courses? Are you going to go for the world's best distribution? So existing MOOC platforms could be good. You could try to, a Christian organization could try to have the blockbuster course. Now, if you don't have a blockbuster course that is going to be best in the world, you probably shouldn't put it on the existing MOOC platforms. A lot of people have talked about the idea of a Christian MOOC platform. I think that that's a bad idea for multiple reasons, but one is that I think to even do it, you probably have to invest at least $10 million. I think that you're probably more likely than not it's going to fail, and you can't tell if it's going to work unless you invest $10 million. There's a lot of other experiments you could do. If you had $10 million, they're going to be better. So if those experiments show that you later need a Christian MOOC platform, you could build it. But if I had $10 million, I wouldn't build it on use a Christian MOOC platform. I would do a bunch of experiments. So what I'm listing out here are, is a roadmap for experiments that you should do. You could have other, distribution besides existing MOOC platforms, and there's a lot of options for that. But I think that the dominant distribution is going to be long tail distribution. So it'll be some schools. Just right now what they're doing is they're in a lot of groups, they have their own open courses where they're just doing them on their own. You can distribute them through app stores, traditional online education. You can distribute through media platforms like iTunes and YouTube. There's long tail MOOCs like Udemy and iTunes. And I really think that the dominant on this is not just going to be long tail. I think it's going to be multi-platform. Whenever I publish my course, I published it on as many platforms as possible, because each one is a distribution channel and it maximizes my distribution. Then there's the question of delivery method. Offline only, blended, online only, mobile. I think that ultimately in the end it's going to be all. If I had to guess, what's going to dominate, mobile only is going to, I think, by far have the most, then online only, then blended, then offline only. But, Christian impact, I think the more, if you take Jesus' approach and you work with the 12, you're going to have big impact with those 12. But I think we need to be competing at all levels. Then there's a question of what's going to be the dominant business model. I really think that the dominant business model is going to be philanthropy driven. There's a lot of reasons for that. I think the biggest reason is that online content has a zero marginal cost, and that lends itself to being philanthropy driven. But you can also see it in what succeeded out there. Khan Academy is philanthropy driven. Then Third Millennium is what I would say probably the best Christian courseware out there. Harvest Time, the Bible app. If you look at the Bible app as a case study, it only succeeded. If the Bible app charged 1 penny for its download, it wouldn't have succeeded. So it had to be philanthropy driven. Right now, existing MOOCs are doing what's, a university marketing investment really is their business model. They're trying to do student recruitment and global branding. To a certain extent, they're offering, freemium courses, open courses. Most groups that are doing that's essentially what they're doing is they're saying if we put this out there, it's going to benefit our brand. I think that's going to be important, but I think that the philanthropy-driven model is likely to dominate. But I could be completely proven wrong. If 1 or 2 schools puts out fantastic, materials out there, they might dominate. The other model I think is going to be very interesting is the fees subscription model. Lynda.com is being very successful in this. Right now you have Christian groups out there, Logos Bible, Bible Mesh is doing that. Udemy has a very interesting business model that's, not a Christian group, but right now Media actually has the most interesting business model out there. They have essentially like the Netflix of Christian videos for small groups, which I think could very easily be adapted into the Netflix of higher education content. And they're partnering with a lot of schools too. So then the last part will be what mechanisms will be used to provide credit and how important will they be. So traditional college credit, I just don't think that's going to be the way it's going to work. GC4, that's why I'm proposing it. I believe it's going to be successful. I think the next tier down is going to be in-country qualifications, vocational qualifications. I don't think that ACE is going to be successful because it's an American system. So I would test some of these, strategies for how do we approach a Christian ecosystem. And I think the other thing we need to do is we need to be thinking about what are the best practices out there. So I've gone and I've looked at, maybe 20 different open Christian courseware providers. And I've worked with a lot of secular courseware providers. And I can tell you, and I'm an architect, and I can tell you these are the principles people should be following to provide the best. If they have the money, do it this way. If you don't have the money, do it whatever way you can do it. But these are the principles they should be trying to do. Multi-platform, so have mobile apps, have web apps. If you can, afford to be on the MOOC, either long tail or, the big MOOCs do that, LMS, whatever. Have your content unbundled, so anyone can reuse your components. So Third Millennium's done a fantastic job of this. But the more you're unbundled, the better. So are your videos on YouTube? Because that makes your videos unbundled. Third Millennium, you could take individual lessons out. You can take individual courses. You can take individual content items out. And I have that separate from sharing because I see groups that they say we're Creative Commons licensed, but if you don't make it easy for people to unbundle it, then you're not really open. So you need to have Creative Commons license. Some groups I've seen out there, Open University actually has all their courses available, just direct download for a common cartridge course export, so any university could import them. That's about as open as you get. Support multiple learning formats, so mobile only, online only, blended, offline only. Most groups will pick only one of these. Sometimes they'll pick two, but I think the best practice is really to make it so that people could do all of those. The other thing is having a complete solution for courses. There's a lot of groups out there that they're putting videos out there. They're putting, a few lessons out there, but there's no test or quizzes. There's no grading. Ultimately, you can't move to the higher levels of quality without having that in there. Another thing is standard content alignment with common subject or degrees. I see some programs out there, they just call their courses something random that they came up with, and it's not even aligned with anything. But if you're going to be teaching about biblical interpretation, then have your course be on biblical interpretation and hermeneutics. So you don't have to use the complicated name. What's important is that you use, you look at what are the common subjects that are out there, and because of that, what it means is that if you have Legos, you have a standard size Lego. Having 3 credit courses can be helpful rather than having 1.5 credit courses. Having interdenominational content makes it more flexible. But obviously not everyone's going to be able to do all these things, and that's part of the uniqueness. So one of the things I've done is I've mapped out some of the providers out there, and I've looked at, Third Millennium, as I mentioned, it's probably the best. So they're multi-platform. They're in mobile app, LMS, all their components are unbundled. They're open license. I don't think they're Creative Commons. I could be wrong. Delivery method, they have online blended. They're not really designed for offline. They do have a course solution where they have quizzes, but that's through their LMS. They don't have it through mobile. Their content's moderately standardized. Their affordability is free. Their quality is excellent. They have a lot of languages, and they're evangelical, although most of their instructors are Reformed, but they're trying to be broadly evangelical. But there's other groups out there that'll be more Pentecostal, and there's other groups that are going to charge. Ultimately, I think some of these providers that are charging a lot, I just think those are going to disappear. I think that subscriptions will be interesting. The ones that are charging a lot without credit, I just think that's not going to happen. If you're charging about the same as a university for a 4-credit course, then I think you're going to have a hard time, getting that to happen. So anyway, to conclude, I tried to pack a ton of material into a 1-hour talk. I actually have an entire course on this. I have 10 sessions in that course. This course is available on Udemy, iTunes, SlideShare. It's called Disruptive Innovation in Higher Education. I've covered a ton of topics, get in a lot more detail. If you felt like, wow, he's going way too quick, or there's a lot of concepts I don't get, I'm going to dig deep. I have a whole section on lean startup for education. I have a whole section on unbundling. I look at the changing role of faculty. I look at, some of you may at the beginning be thinking, I don't believe that what you say is going to happen in the future. I provide a lot more of the basis of what are the driving trends, go into disruptive innovation theory. So I would encourage you, if you want more, look at that. Look it up on Udemy, iTunes U. I have a playlist on YouTube, playlist on SlideShare. I'm going to put this course on SlideShare and on YouTube. This talk. We have this Google group for the Christian Higher Education Innovation Alliance. There's the link that you can find for that. Just to tell you what this group is it's a group, informal Google group with 50 leading innovators from 20 plus Christian institutions. The intent is to be the Christian counterpart of the University Innovation Alliance. That is a secular group that's saying, how do we dramatically expand access to higher education? How do we share innovation? The purpose of this group is to focus on diffusion of innovation to improve the competitiveness of the overall Christian higher education ecosystem. The focus is on disruptive innovation, so a 5 to 50 year time frame. And ultimately, I think the opportunity is, how do we get radically increased productivity through human-machine collaboration? And we've identified 3 different work areas. Low-end disruption, so the first work area is this Global Christian College Credit Consortium. High-end disruption is largely going to focus on analytics, big data, and adaptive learning to improve outcomes for all students regardless of background. The University Innovation Alliance is really the world's leader on that, and what we're going to try to do is take what they learned and diffuse that into Christian higher education. The third is really what is called process or business model innovation, and I think that really the 2 models there that are going to be the most interesting, I think, for Christian schools is dual enrollment or early college. There's no reason why college shouldn't start in high school. People can start, once you unbundle, you can start getting credit in high school. And I think that really is going to be a major, major competitive aspect of the Christian global higher education system. And also providing free courses is marketing. We're not trying to do sustained innovations. There's tons of other Christian groups out there. There's tons of other secular groups out there. But if you want to join, just go to the Google group. City Vision, I'm not going to go into all the details. You can find out more about us online. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn. We are an evangelical organization, but broadly partners. You can read about us on Christianity Today. And then, the last, I'm just going to stop with a few questions for discussion. If you're, discussing this with a group, and this might be something you think about, after this talk. So, let's assume that this future that we've talked about, these are some UN forecast of growth of higher education. So for Christian higher education to just keep up with that growth, it's going to have to grow from 163% in a 25-year period. So that's if we're just going to keep up to grow, and I want to grow beyond that. But really the question is, what role can we play to help global Christian higher education grow to that level? What would we need to do differently, and how do we take steps towards that goal? So I would love for you to connect with me, send me an email. I will go back to the very beginning of this. My email is just andrew@cityvision.edu if any of you want to connect with me, and you can connect with me at andrew@cityvision.edu. Let me see if I can get back in time. All right. So there's my email address. I'd love to connect with you. There's my LinkedIn address. So thanks a lot. Bye.